Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome cinematographer Tari Segal, who joins us to talk about their work on interior Chinatown. Terry will talk us through the creative decisions made in creating the look for the show. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Terry. Hi Terry, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to sit down and talk about Interior Chinatown, which has just come out on Hulu and also on Disney Plus in the UK. Yeah, I'm excited to sit down and talk to you about the show. How have you found the reaction to it so far?
A lot of people seem to really dig it. I think because it's kind of weird and different and something new. So it's been kind of cool because I wasn't sure if anyone would understand it, and maybe they don't, but it's fun to watch.
Yeah, and it's something like a different kind of flavor of a show, which I'm excited to do a deep dive in with you as well. But it's really like a change of pace because I think we're so used to having quite dark and dour shows, even though this has sort of like a darker matter to it. But the look of it is different to if you watched something like I don't know, they usually just put like a grading or make it look a lot darker and dreary, whilst this is a lot brighter and more colourful, and there's a lot of different styles at play with it.
Yeah, exactly. It was a lot of fun to capture all the different worlds and stuff. And in the beginning it's very gritty and very handheld, mixed with, the black and white show, which is supposed to be more polished in a procedural way, very overly lit. Everyone's backlit all the time, very studio mode, and you're in these separate worlds and you're trying to make sense of it. And then about halfway around episode 6, the worlds kind of combine and it becomes more serious and does start to have that kind of heavier, look of like a with a almost like a True Detective Mindhunter-esque vibe.
With something like because there's so many different styles at play, where do you begin in your research? Because we get that Law and Order feel, but then we also get a different world feel, and then you get the sort of noir feel, and it's kind of like an ice cream sundae where you just have that, you have the main sort of look, which is the ice cream, and then you get all the little, the sauce, the sort of Skittles, the maybe the Smarties as well added to it, and you're just like, oh, I'm just enjoying this so much.
Yeah, I mean, Charles, the showrunner, gave us a lot of room to be creative. And funny enough, the biggest thing we needed to get right was the cop show because that played against everything else. And so there were a lot of questions and ideas surrounding that. And obviously, Law and Order was referenced. And having been part of the Dick Wolf world, I brought to their attention that actually the lighting style of Law and Order is a bit more gritty than what they were trying to describe, which is more of a CSI look, which is bright and colorful. So what we took from Law and Order were pieces of like coverage style and the strong overs and uh way that the lead cop characters relate to each other. And then from CSI, we took color and camera movement always and things like that. And then we could play with the other worlds, like the Willis world of Chinatown was very much influenced by Wong Kar-wai's earlier works like Fallen Angels, where it's very lens and practical locations and practical lighting. Even though we built a lot of that on stage, we built it, we actually small and very hard to maneuver in just to get that real feeling.
I also had like a weird feel of like Big Trouble in Little China with
Yep.
Willis's World.
Hmm.
I've just watched that film recently, so I kind of felt that was slightly ingrained in what was happening and what was going on. But I do love how it all connects. And it's funny that you mentioned CSI as well, because that did not cross my mind, even though that's been like one of the main procedurals of the past 20 years with Law and Order.
Yeah,
Um,
in order, but CSI is has such a big influence too on that procedural world.
and also like the sort of movement of the camera in that show where, they're doing the like blood tests, which usually in real world will take like 12 weeks. They're like, yeah, we did it in 3 minutes, but they'll do it in like a quick on a dolly sort of pan and all of this, and cut it all
Hmm.
together.
Yeah, one of the fun things we did in episode two, because we're episode two is really trying to establish a show which exists but doesn't exist, was the walk and talk, which is a thing, a tool that people use a lot, to gather up a lot of information in these shows. And so we have them instead of like taking a direct route to their desk, they do it go on the office just to be able to get all the information out, people popping in at the right moment, sort of making fun of that tool.
It's like what's it called? Who is that? The very famous writer, The West Wing. Aaron Sorkin. He loves a walk and
Yeah.
talk, and I think I got
Yeah.
parodied in like 30 Rock, and that's what it felt like in the second episode. But I guess with like the second episode, because you're sort of establishing more of like different worlds and having a delivery guy,
Hmm.
that walk and talk just kind of pulls you in as an audience to the sort of hustle and bustle of what's going on and how much Willis kind of stands out more than actually trying to blend in with what he's doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that very much so, I think. Like also, there's that scene that takes place outside an alleyway. They're trying to Lana and get Lana, you're, Chinatown expert. And they have to keep resetting her themselves because Lana's not giving them the line that she's supposed to deliver. And she keeps trying to pull Willis in, but the camera can't frame him. So that was kind of an idea of ours. Like we just like we wouldn't frame for him, even though he's part of the scene. And it's written that way. If you had a chance to read the scripts, trying to make sense of them while prepping the episodes is it was kind of challenging in its own.
How do you prep that as like when it's written in a certain way? Because I guess as a normal script, it'd be, officer one does this, officer two does this, dialogue, then walk off. But whilst you kind of have so much going on in the scene, how do you prep that? And then what happens on the day when you're trying to block it, but it's not necessarily how you would have thought it would be in your mind?
Right. So, typically your episodes are blocked with a concept meeting, and the director's there talking to the writer about these ideas. I think these were the most involved concept meetings I've ever had, where production design and myself are just chiming in with all these questions because it was our one chance to figure out what do you mean the light follows him out? What do he's, or we would bring up things like, well, it says here Willis has all this dialogue, but we're in the show, so we wouldn't frame him. And they're like, exactly. So it was pretty much starting off with as many questions as possible to know the roles of the different worlds, and then they would just let us interpret the rest of it. And so if we had any questions or anything that came up, the writers were always there, but it was really us figuring it out together and trying to understand the roles and the motivation of the camera because of who he is as a character. Um, and then a lot, you want to give the actors a lot of blocking, but they would also sometimes the what we were trying to achieve in this particular storyline. So we would have to remind them, like, well, this is why, we don't want to frame you, so we're going to step you out a little bit because, so they understood that they had to constantly understand what world you were in and what the camera was trying to show. Episode how she is a bit more, film noir the way we would her. But, you know, uh, as the story goes on, her character shows a lot of flaws, and so that kind of only really existed in episode two and three a bit.
I still think it's cool though to be able to sort of mix so many different ideas because it feels like in a way when you're having that blocking and actors being like, I need to know which world I'm in, feels like a bit like a plate, not a plate, sorry, a play, in its own way,
Hmm.
because you're probably as different cameras, different movements, or if there's like if the camera's on a tripod, or if you're on a dolly, or handheld, or on a steady cam. So I can imagine that could be quite difficult as an actor to be like, well, what's the camera going to be doing? Because you don't want to necessarily get it wrong and hit it or miss your mark as well.
Exactly. And sometimes we had to overlap in two different modes too. So sometimes we're in Steadicam studio mode and we had to also like once the cops leave, we have to switch to a handheld. And so we would, instead of having to shoot it 3 times, we would, do a camera transition with Steadicam or with the dolly just to and they understood it, and so we would repeat things for those reasons. Um, and the people who play the two cops, Lisa and Sullivan, um, they were really great at understanding how we needed them to be the superstar cops that they were, and how you do it in a way where the shorter person's always in front and the taller person's always in the back. So they kind of always, oh, I'm over here, right? Because I'm taller. So they got that.
I think that's quite interesting as well, just even knowing about heights and how people would need to work in their different ways. Which is something that like even I know like when you're making a TV show or film is like something that people as audience members you don't really recognize, right? That how much height would play a difference in the camera placement and how it's going to move around. But yeah, it's like now I'm thinking about it, it's like yeah, they always were, in the front and then at the back, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
quite funny. It's
Yeah.
clever as well.
Yeah, yeah, because the camera and the perspective too just lends itself to that sort of composition. So it was always that taller person was always in the back. And I think I did that when I used to shoot a show called FBI, and our two leads, one of them, he was second to Maggie, but he was also very tall. So it also worked that way to always be putting him behind her because it just felt right, compositionally.
I think as well when you have something like that, it's you always feel like you've got the sort of brains in the front and then the brawn at the back and as well.
Yeah. Hmm.
And it's like once you got the brains working, then the brawn come in just in case anything gets sort of heated up. But what I'm also curious to know about as well, because once you have that change, later on from episode is it 8 with Ad Guy?
Yes. Yeah.
8, yes. You kind of have a style change. How does that then get into your mindset of going from thinking about different ways of how a scene will be lit to then going back to, for a lack of a better term, more of a traditional way of working?
Leaning into these ideas as much as possible was going to help us get the point across to the audience. So we really had to do an extreme version of each thing. And so that's why early on, when we're handheld and wide, we are really trying to live in that world as much as possible. So that later when we go um, to this more elevated look, it would really stand apart from those. Because typically when you're designing a show and looking for a style, you're looking for something to support story. But here we're trying to support a look, which is part of the story. So it was kind of difficult at times because you wouldn't really think to shoot this way for this particular scene because the scene didn't have that kind of quality to it. But I think that approach was part of that story. So we just kind of took a lot of references from shows like that. And when we were framing them as well, it was a little bit challenging to the actors who are all comedic actors as well to also be placed in such a way that it actually limits their movement. Jimmy and stuff, who's very comedic, and Sullivan as well, and people who like to move a lot in space. Now you're in a very serious world where you're trying to really create those kind of coverage shots that exist in stillness and in like a dark bar where they're not really moving a lot, and there's like an intensity to it. But it was actually quite challenging for them to at first to like get used to that new look.
Obviously, this kind of probably comes down to showrunner and director as well.
Mhm.
But as a DOP, how do you communicate that with actors, knowing that with actors, I could imagine that they're very more
It,
not flamboyant in their movement, but more sort of active
right.
and sort of they have that sort of energy that they want to exude from their performance onto the screen.
I think for the most part, they had a lot of trust in us at the end. They weren't always happy, but in the we were all pretty much a family. So he'd be like, "Okay, I guess you're limiting me, even though you know it would be really great." We would play with it a lot, and sometimes they would say, "Well, I really want to do this. Is there a way to do that in this style?" And so. And there were we it's you were also covering, like you mentioned, in a more traditional sense, so you weren't just find some sort of floating oneer. We could do wider pieces that kind of moved into things, but we wanted to be very still and static, and they could play that frame while the other person anchored them. So there were rules like that that we could play with them. And if I could pull Jimmy aside and say, this is kind of the ideal for this, and he would get it and say, okay, but I'm planning on doing this, and like, okay, but here's our limits that we'd love to work in to make this shot work, and he'd get it. So it was kind of a combination.
It's just always interesting to hear that side of it as well because it's not like you're stopping someone from doing what they're doing, but it's also just making sure you're all on the right page. I guess it goes back to the bit where like hitting their mark as well. Especially with like comedy.
Yes.
Like the first person that comes to mind about like comedies like Jim Carrey and the way that he performs, and it's like that must be a nightmare to sort of capture that with how he can be and how he
It,
performs.
yeah. It was because Lisa is who plays the female cop. She's like a comic herself. And so she also was, her marks were very loose, but for everything to work, everything had to be super designed, and nothing was like, well, we can just move it over here. And so there were challenges and lots of takes to get it, but we would, and we'd figure it out with the camera. Um, and I think as things typically you're building a show over months and months with people, and the style has just become second nature to everyone. But because everything was different every single day, it was a daily reminder to the talent of what we were trying to do. So it was a bit confusing at times, but it worked. And then you get to ad guy, and we're attempting to shoot five, six different commercials, and each one required a different style. And so that was also had its own challenges in that regard.
I think with Ad Guy as well, that episode threw me off a little bit because I didn't know what to expect. And then when it was jumping
Mhm.
from different sort of advertisements to the next one, I got it. I got it. Then I was like, oh, okay, I know what they're doing with this episode. And there is there's so many different styles as well. So there must be as like a cinematographer probably being like, cool, I can do this really cool smoky drinks ad, or I can do this musical number, which looks incredible as well. As a cinematographer, because you might have experience in one sort of field and maybe not in another field, how do you prep for an episode like that to go from this is what we're going to do to then execution? Because it's also the transitioning from the ads to the real world as well.
Mhm. Yeah, that it was a very challenging episode, and they don't give you any more time to prep than normal, first of all. So that was also like, okay, I think they had high hopes for the episode, but they also gave me a lot of room. They had high hopes in the sense let's just attempt to do all these things, and production design can build all these sets. But the approach and the look for each style of commercial really had to resonate with people, and give you that kind of, like, for the watch commercial, that kind of high fashion look. And so it really quick. I pulled a lot of references. Obviously, as a cinematographer, it's a dream to be able to shoot so many different looks within one, show, one episode. So my gaffer and he was really excited about it. So we just, pulled every trick out of the book that we could for every single piece. And the musical was probably the most challenging because we didn't have a lot of time for it. that whole set was built within a week and a half on a stage that had no support for rigging lights. So we had to build everything in, all the lighting cues, and shoot this thing, and it only lasts for 30 seconds. And then you're thinking, besides these looks, I have to figure out how we're going to shoot the in-betweens, which, it just was nonstop for 9 days.
Isn't that crazy though, building such a big set for just that 30
Hmm.
seconds? That is
Yeah.
movie magic. Um, but then also, when you have a set like that where you can't rig lighting, I'm guessing that comes with its own sort of frustrations and trouble and sort of the troubles because then you have to be more creative, but then it's probably going to be more difficult. How do you go about with working with your gaffer to sort of make sure that you can get everything rigged and lit for something like that?
Well, we actually had to build the rigging for it with my key grip. We had to build a grid system. So it, again, the idea on page was simply Willis does this deodorant commercial, and and it's like really a really short scene description, and then the director's like, well, it should be, well, let's do this big musical, and everyone got on board, and so the thing like blew up 50 times what it would have written on the pages. And I went to the stage. Art department showed me an idea in 2D. I have all these pictures of like a 2D set that they built. And I said, all right, you know, this is where I need all the lights. And I went to the key grip and gaffer while they were shooting on another stage, and we put together a thing and said to the producers, this is what it's going to be. This is what it's going to cost. And they approved it, which to our surprise, and we're like, okay, I guess we're doing this now. So then we had to commit to it, because it took a lot of work. It was a really expensive day for us.
I think that's another thing where you think maybe we might get away with it without them approving it, and then it's like, no, go ahead.
Sure.
It's probably just like, oh man, we actually have to do this now.
No, it was a fun, great challenge, and it's a fun, great challenge. You wish you like it's. I feel like you would have had weeks to prepare for it, and we didn't. And you kind of have to go with your gut in pre-production because it wasn't the only thing I had to plan. So I kind of like looked at it. I saw what I needed, went with the gaffer, and he goes, "Yes, that seems doable. This is what it is." And then you just move on. So, and then the day comes when you have to shoot it, and you're like, "Ah, here I am." And we have no more time left, so let's get this done, and with what we have.
That's still cool though. Like the whole sort of process of doing it and then how the end products come up as well. It's incredible. And I think as well, like that's
Mhm.
hats off to you and the team and everybody involved because there must have been a number of nights, probably some stress as well that goes along with the job, and probably a lot of
Yeah,
coffee
I
drunk
mean,
as
it was
well.
it was never easy. For sure, it was never easy. I mean, we're also doing company moves on location. So there's that one commercial with a watch bet, and we're shooting in the lobby. And I think in that day we also had a company move to a night exterior as well. But you do it for 8 days and forget, just our day comes and you're like, oh, right, we're doing that today. And you go there and like the rigging team has done what we had planned to do. And you're just trying to remember the approach because you just finished a crazy day. And so now you're doing this other thing. It's like a nonstop show. That episode was incredible. I think we all drank a lot afterwards, and and shared war stories.
I think as well, like company moves are brutal as well. Because I work in transport, so I know exactly what it's like. And I think I know another job where they've got 86 moves, and I think they shoot for 120 days or something. So pretty much so like somewhere new every other day, or maybe less, like once a day is a move. But even on top of that, and
Oh,
then going from sort of day to night, it can be really, really taxing. And also the fact that once you're so wired for a day to then work on a night, switching over, yes, it can be confusing.
totally. So you completely understand because I don't think everyone really gets that your rigging crew came in before and then you're hopscotching. So you're going there and then the rigging crew and their trucks are moving to the location you're going to later that day, and then you shoot all that, and then you pack up and go over there. I mean, it's a carnival. It takes a village. Sure.
Yeah, 100%. And then also it's the as because just sometimes you're working ahead, so then when you're actually on the day that you think you're working on, actually working on the next day, and then you're not thinking about the day before, and it can be sort of like, oh, hang on a second,
Yeah,
what have I done here?
totally. It's like at lunch, the rigging team's like, Terry, can you come and see the set for tomorrow real quick? We want to know if you still like the original plan. I'm like, okay, fine. Let's, what are we doing? And yeah, it's just it's crazy. It can be really, really intense. But it's a lot of fun in that intensity, but it just really is like once it's over, I mean, it's just done with. But for those brief moments, I mean, that's where the magic happens. It's either happening now or it's never gonna happen.
Yeah, and it's also crazy to think that you're sort of resting on that magic waiting to happen to then maybe not
Hmm.
happen, but you're kind of like, we're just gonna hedge our bets and just all in, all in.
Oh, that sort of pressure that I think, obviously over the years I've gotten used to, but you're expected to deliver this high quality work with the prep that you're given, and it involves so many people, and there's no accounting for you know the operator getting it done on the day, or the talent hitting those marks you're hoping for, or to it then, and hair and makeup and everyone being very tight, everything coming together well. There's all the stuff, and you still have to get it done. You still have to make that day.
Yeah, and it's as also it's not a job where you can't prepare. You fail to prepare,
Mhm,
you're prepared to fail, and especially
mhm,
when you're packing so much in a day. If you're doing a 9-day shoot for sort of 45 pages, you could be averaging what 5 pages a day of
mhm.
script, which is pretty heavy going when you think about it. And most people are like, oh, that should be quite easy, but it's like actually no,
Yeah,
you need to get all your
no,
setups, all your dialogue. Who knows how long one bit of a page could be? And as you said, oh, this commercial for deodorant, it wasn't originally the you know musical number, so then it's that 1/8 actually turns into something completely different.
completely different. And you could have a 5-page day, and you could have 6 scenes, and they're small scenes, but each one's going to be a new setup, and you could be moving through the stage, and it can take up every minute of your day to get everything.
Yeah, and it's I don't know, it's just sometimes it's
Mhm.
amazing how things can get done in a day and how you have the right people there to push you along and be like, yeah, we're ready, or how confident people can be in their work as well.
No, it's funny. Sometimes I will look back at my work from other shows too, and just like, geez, how did we do that? Like knowing what we were up against. And even this show, we shot it over a year ago. So it just came out, and I'm going back into it and watching it. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe we pulled that off, knowing what we were up against. And weather can delay you too, all sorts of things.
Yes, and that's another thing. Like I remember doing night shoots a couple of years ago, and they were all outside, and then a little bit of wind or rain, and it's like, no, we need to do weather cover, and then you have to go back and forth, and it was supposed to be 2 weeks. I think it ended up being like 3.5 weeks, and it's just, yeah, you kind of sit there and you think, man, like this is my life. Like I'm living a completely different
Yeah.
life, like nocturnal life that like no one would understand. And then like when you're driving home, it's like just still, and you think, oh, this is like quite creepy as well.
Totally, I totally get that. And it's so funny because you could have an easy night and the winds are like 20 miles an hour, and you're just like, well, I'm screwed now because my lift that everything's depending on can't go up. What's the plan? Yeah, and you just get through the night and you're just like, what was that about? And yeah, your life gets sucked out of you on night shoots, and it's sometimes hard to go to sleep, and you're not getting enough sleep. It can be so disruptive, and it's a very unique experience.
Yeah, and you feel like a changed person afterwards. You feel like you've gone through
Mm.
something when you have that day off to catch up on your sleep, and then you get back and you're like, was that a fever dream? Was it real? Was it not?
Yeah.
Who
Was
knows?
it a fever dream? Exactly.
I'm curious about to know, going back to interior Chinatown,
Mhm,
because there's a lot of exterior shots in the show, and then also there's sort of you don't really shoot in order. So again, for something for like ad guy where you're dropping in and out of different adverts and styles, how do you go about with the lighting of the scene and then sort of trying to match what this previous scene was like before? So I guess with earlier episodes, it's like when you're inside and they're doing like this in a certain time of day, and then when Willis steps back out, it's light. So you're trying to match what the lighting was like coming from the sun into the building to then coming outside.
mhm,
But then with Ad Guy, it's the lighting from an advert to then walking onto a soundstage to maybe walking in a hotel or being outside.
mhm. Yeah, it takes a lot of planning and I like to shoot location before I shoot the stage so that I can match the lighting. And so no, that's the case. Otherwise I have to take a gamble on sun, but more often than not, my AD is able to, you know, do all these exteriors before you do the interiors, which helps for that part of it. With Ad Guy, again, each commercial required a different look, so that look determined how much so if it was an in between, in his mind, would just control as much as possible. And I didn't do that with every episode because that wasn't the world that we were in, but because it was the world, we had a lot of overheads we were flying and artificial backlight that we'd put in, a lot of negative that we would put in. So everything was super controlled episode.
Yeah, I guess as like as an audience member and watching stuff like that, it's kind of amazing to not see, not get taken out of the episode, and then also for it not,
Mhm.
even though if you have one style and then the other style, and then it's not necessarily too bright for you. I just think like visually and stylistically, it's great to look at and see and not worry about, oh, I'm what's happening here? What world is this? Oh, where are we now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And
mean, and it's just so it's good when you have ADs who understand your needs for when it comes to exteriors because there were times when I was just like there's just no way I can do this at this time because it's just going to be, especially in LA in the summer and you have that strong sun coming down on you. I'm like there's just no way this is going to work, and so everything was very carefully planned to the hour of when we could shoot out there. For the cop show, because the cop show had to be so controlled, it was really trying to get the sun off of them and get into a place where we can add artificial on them so it would feel more of the old style TV way of being lit. So we had to make sure that we weren't shooting when the sun was hitting locations for those bits, but it was just a lot of planning.
waiting, obviously they'll schedule the day around how the sun will be, but when you're
Mhm.
planning and chasing the sun and doing worried about the weather, how do you go about planning for something like that? Do you sort of just take a deck chair out to where you're on location and see how the sun moves, or do you sort of just look at how what pictures would be like in that area around that times that you want to shoot?
I when I'm scouting, the very first day I'm scouting there, I'm always looking at where the sun direction is going to be, and because you have to get such a jump on it because everyone's vying for time. Design doesn't want to, they need time to set up the location. And so everyone's going to want the best time. And try and jump in right away. Like, oh, we can only shoot this in the afternoon, and I'll just do it right away. And everyone looks at me and I go, so that's already in their head. And then they'll come and tell me if it's like, well, it's a real issue. Let's see what we can do. But it's like you really have to make it happen. And on these schedules, you don't always get the best time to shoot. Sometimes you get really screwed and you're shooting at a time you don't want to, and they're like, "Well, this is just how it's going to be, and you're just going to have to." to light it and shoot it. So when those situations arise, one thing for interior Chinatown is I can, oh, well, that's not the look for this part. And if that wants to be successful, this is what we're going to need. So for this particular show, it was great to have that in my back pocket to be able to argue why we needed to push back against, everything else to be able to make it happen at the right time. Because normally it's impossible and you understand it and it's a give and take. But I had a lot more leeway on this show. Or they would just give me the thing to make it done. So if I needed a condor and I needed a fly swatter to kind of build an overhead to control it because we're not shooting at the best time of day, they would give it to me because they know how important that look is for the show, which doesn't always happen on every show.
It's basically, it sounds like you have to be a fast gunslinger to just get in front of everybody and say, let's do this. All right, bye.
No, I mean that's my approach. I'm sure other people have things where they just say, "Well, no, this is just how it has to be." But for me, I get in right away and go, "Well, this is going to be terrible during the morning. Might as well shoot this in the afternoon, all backlit." And then I walk off to a corner and get a coffee. So it's
I
kind of
feel
fun.
I feel like that's a very like good way of just doing it and letting everybody else sort of decide on what to do. Um,
Yeah.
there's on the show. There's two cinematographers, yourself and Mike Bellucci. Hopefully, I've pronounced that correctly. How do you go about collaborating with one another, but then also not sacrificing your style, so that not one or the other overshadow each other on the show?
Well, first off, it's always great to have a good partner when you're rotating on a show. And sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. But Mike was a fantastic partner. And we did somewhat of a handoff, because the show was always evolving. And I don't think anyone really had a finite idea of every visual part of the show. It was kind of like, let's just see how these first two episodes go. So, it would be like he would do something and say, this is what I did, and what do you think? Do you think that works? And I go, yeah, I'm going to do this. And do you think this green is too much? No, I love, and so we would definitely conversations and hang out and talk about the original episodes because every episode pretty much was different from the last anyway. So they were all jumping off points. So it really was just making sure the other person knew where you ended. And then they could go off. And that was unique to this show. Oftentimes it is trying to maintain that throughout. But this one definitely was more of a hard kind of jumping off point for the next episode.
Okay, I guess like it's always interesting to hear the collaboration process because it is, even though with films or some other TV shows it will be one person being the cinematographer, but when you have two people, I guess it's like sometimes it's interesting to hear how ideas about stuff and then getting the idea of like, whoa, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Or I was going to think of doing this, and then sort of, I never thought of it about that way. And I guess the whole collaboration process as well, is so vital because it's the how do we make sure that we all get on the same page, but then also start thinking about things that we might not have thought of as well.
Yeah, it was such a funky show in that way. And I've had experiences where, my partner is it's just they're doing their thing, I'm doing my thing, and we're just, we know what the look of the show is, and you just do your thing. And then times when we kind of, can lean on each other and share ideas and stuff. Um, and on this show, for example, I did ad guy number 8, which pretty much had nothing to do with anything that Mike was doing, and it kind of stood alone, and he would just come by sometimes and go, "What are you doing for that? That's so cool." And we would admire each other's work, and so I felt really lucky to have such a great partner in him because it's fun. It's fun. Two DPs, it can be a very, solo job, a very solitude type position you're in, right? So to have someone who knows everything or caring and wanting to it's to have a partner that you can hang at the end of the day and shoot them and say, "What a day that I have," and they totally understand.
Yeah, 100%. And also like the solitude of the job can be quite taxing, but if you have that
Mhm.
sort of partner in crime, it works out quite nicely.
Hmm.
Um,
We would get jealous of each other's work and in the healthiest way, but like we would do some things. Oh my God, I never would have thought that when I read a script that was really cool. And he would, be like, "Man, I'm really jealous you got to do the ad guy." So I was like, yeah, well.
I think that as well, that healthy air quotes, should we say, competition as well, and being like, wow. But then I guess
Hmm.
you kind of look at each other and you see, okay, somebody set the bar that high, and now I need to hit that and then hit that bar, but then also maybe move it up a little bit higher for the next person with the next episode.
1,000%. I felt that all the time, and I think that's the success of the show visually.
Yeah, exactly. And the proof is in the pudding, as they say. I've got two more questions to ask. For my penultimate question, what was your favorite
Okay.
scene that you didn't shoot?
My favorite scene that I didn't shoot. I mean, I guess I'd have to say the kung fu scene because that turned out so well in episode one. The fighting scene. I mean, the choreography of that was great. And the slow motion and stuff that they did. That one looked like hell to shoot, but the result was really cool.
Would hate to think of like the cult continuity side of that because yeah, let's go again.
Oh
It's like,
yeah,
oh, how do we reset? What was it like before? But again, I guess that's kind of it
I'm
would be
pretty
cool to shoot.
sure. I'm pretty sure they shot that over 2 days as well. So continuity wise, I remember watching dailies just thinking like, oh my God, where are they in this scene? It's you know, but it comes together in the edit, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yes, and you probably shoot it out of order as well because you want to
Hmm.
get in one way, get into one section and then the other section, and then sort of cut. And then whoever's in the edit has to sort of sit down and be like, "Oof, this is going to be a bit difficult to cut through." But I can imagine that's going to be quite fun as well at the same time.
Hmm.
And then just to hit my final question, what was your favorite scene to shoot?
My favorite scene to shoot. Um, That's a good question. It might be episode 4. There's a dance number with Fatty, a little choreographed thing where he's being the bad waiter and he's coming out with the trays and serving everyone and doing all of that. And Stephanie Lang was the director, and again, this is the magic, this is the great thing about the show where Charles gives the directors a lot of room. So it's written, Fatty comes out and serves people, and Stephanie took it to another level and got this dance performance and stuff. And it was just a lot of fun because Fatty rehearsed it, and you don't see him as someone who could be, hitting all these marks and everything, and he does it so well. Um, and then it was just a dance with the camera and getting everything right, and so that was cool. It came together really well.
Solid choice. I think anything with Fatty in it was always a delight to watch.
Mhm.
I think he kind of makes you feel like yourself at times when you're working with certain bits and you feel a bit lost. But he always has a little chuckle
Yeah,
and has that positivity about him at certain times.
yeah.
Terry, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Interior Chinatown is streaming now on Hulu and Disney Plus in the UK. Go out, watch Terry and her team's work, and yeah, enjoy it. Thank you again, Terry.
Thank you.
You take
Bye.
care and bye bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.